Hi, I'm Joey Deanna, and I'm a colorist and online editor based out of the DC area. I started my career in post production about 20 years ago. My career has always been around the finishing process more than the creative editorial process. But yeah, I've been doing post production for a little over 20 years now. These days, I work exclusively in Vinci Resolve, and that's because, over the years working on all these different platforms, I've kind of touched a lot of different disciplines in finishing. While I focus on color, I still do a good bit of online editing. I still do a little bit of titling, some graphics, a good amount of subtle visual effects compositing, like blurring things, maybe green screens, maybe screen replacements. And the cool thing about Resolve for me is that I can do all of those things in one place. I don't need to jump from application to application. It's got basically all of the tools for any problem I would need to solve in the final finishing of a show or a film available to me. For me, my favorite kind of project to work on is something that was photographed well and photographed with a creative intent behind what they were shooting, right? So if I can work with the DP and talk to them and say, okay, I was going for this on set, and that's why we lit it this way. That's why the production design or these colors and these elements, something that had a lot of thought put into the production is usually a much more creatively rewarding thing to work with than if they shot something, really neutral and then they were trying to add some style into it after the fact. What a colorist does is we're kind of the last finishing step in the visuals of a film or a show. So, what we're doing is we are kind of adjusting the images to best show the creative vision of the director of photography, and everything else involved in the entire production. And at the end of the day, we're usually the last eyes on a project in finishing. So basically, anything that needs to get fixed or adjusted, we're going to be doing that at the very end of the process. The technology behind color grading and finishing is even though it's been around for a long time, it's still evolving pretty rapidly and in a lot of different ways. So yeah, it's a little hard to keep track of sometimes, but I try to stay ahead with all of the latest technology. The biggest thing recently that's kind of evolved is HDR and wide color gamuts and more advanced display technologies, because for years in color grading, at least for television, we were taking really high dynamic range images and then creatively deciding how to cram them into a smaller dynamic range display medium, which was television, right? We had images with 13 to 15 stops of dynamic range that we had to beat down into a 6 or 7 stop dynamic range of Rec 709 television. These days, with HDR and newer display technologies, we kind of have a bigger, canvas to work with. And that's a technical challenge to figure out how best to do those workflows, but it's also a really interesting creative challenge because you really need to think about how does this extra dynamic range and extra capability serve the story or not serve the story? How can it be visually used in the best creative way? So it's kind of an exploration of some of these newer technologies. And one of the things I've done that I think has helped me the most in kind of trying to embrace the newest technologies is, even if a project I'm working on doesn't need to be done in HDR or doesn't need to go to a modern advanced format like Dolby Vision or something like that. If it's a project, like I said earlier, that's, shot really well with a really nice, good creative intent behind it and, high quality, I'll usually take those projects and regrade them in HDR and Dolby Vision just on my own time anyway, just to get the experience in the chair of creatively manipulating in HDR and in the latest technologies, because there's no replacement for time when it comes to evolving creativity and taste and what looks good and what doesn't. You got to experiment, you got to try things, you got to fail and then start over a bunch, and being able to do that on lower pressure things like, oh, this is a project that I already finished, the client loves it, but let's just make a really cool looking HDR version of it for the experience. That's been a huge help in kind of, you know, keeping abreast of the latest technologies. And the biggest shift we've had, like I said, the biggest shift in imaging technology that we've had is the move from SDR to HDR, right? Going from SD to HD to UHD and higher resolutions, right? The colorimetry didn't drastically change. How we are capturing, transmitting, and displaying an image didn't change. HDR is a fundamentally different way of encoding, distributing, and playing back images. So it's definitely been a big learning curve to kind of adopt those technologies as well. But like I said, I try to be on the leading edge and an early adopter in any way that I can. I love working with clients in the room because basically everything we do creatively in color is subjective. And things like the viewing environment that you're in drastically change your color perception. So there's a lot of things that can get done much, much, much faster when you're both in the same room, looking at the same calibrated monitor at the same time. We have commonality of what we're talking about. We're both in the same ballpark. The two most absolutely important tools that you can have in a color suite are, one, a calibrated reference monitor, so you know what you're looking at is accurate to the standard you're mastering for. That's kind of non-negotiable, right? And two, video scopes. Scopes are absolutely essential to everything I do day to day, because what they do is they give you a completely objective technical view of your image that is not colored by perception. It is not colored by how tired you are, or if you're in a mood or whatever. And your reference monitor, yes, it's very accurate, but your brain can play a lot of tricks on you, and your perception of color is very variable. That's why we set up these rooms in a very neutral way with controlled lighting, to reduce the amount of influence to your brain to only the image. But having scopes available to be a objective baseline of this is what your image is essential. Besides the grading monitor and the grading tools themselves, the scopes are kind of the most important additional tool that you need in a grading suite. I started with OmniScope very, very, very early. I was one of the first batch of alpha and beta testers of it, and it's obviously evolved in great ways since then. But I remember the first test build of OmniScope that I found, that I was invited to evaluate. I was immediately impressed by both the visual quality of the scopes, how detailed they were, and the performance of them. They basically didn't overload the computer they were running on, which was a plus. And as I'm moving the grading controls and my monitor's updating, my scopes are updating in absolute lockstep real time, which is essential because you don't want to wait and have the scopes be kind of a steppy response. They need to be instant. That's why they were hardware for the longest time, is they need to be responsive. They need to show you what you're doing in real time. And since the first version of OmniScope, performance has been a huge advantage of it. One of the things about external scopes, whether it's software scopes like OmniScope or even those older hardware scopes I was talking about, that I think is really important is, first, they don't take any load off of your primary system, especially since I have OmniScope running on my Assist station. It's kind of got its own video input. It is separate from my grading system. It never slows down my grading system to do all the processing for the scopes. But also, we don't only live in kind of one environment inside the box, right? Our signal has to go out to a reference monitor for us to monitor. It's very important in my mind to be able to look at your final output signal objectively, not just what the grading software is showing you, because especially in situations with modern HDR formats or digital deliverables, where things like video versus legal levels is very important to get right. And if your monitoring is set up for one set of input parameters and your SDI output on your grading system is set up for a different set of output parameters, your internal scopes could be telling you one thing, but what you're monitoring might be something completely different and might be something not correct. So having that kind of base level verification of this is my SDI output signal that I'm looking on my reference monitor, these are its actual values, is very important to me and worth having external scopes on its own. Not to mention all of the additional features that these external scopes allow you to have that no software's internal scopes offer. My business partner, Robbie at DC Color, and I have started a podcast called the Offset Podcast that is available now. And it's kind of a bi-monthly half hour to 40-minute show of me and Robbie just discussing a topic because, we've been around the industry a very long time. We've both been teachers, educators, presenters, demo artists for various companies. So we've been around the community of colorists for a very long time, and we love just talking shop with other colorists and exchanging workflow ideas and creative ideas and talking about this craft that we do. And we always had people telling us, oh, we should record this because, we've hosted various events over the years at various conferences, NAB, BIRTV, other big industry get-togethers. So we decided to, start a podcast and just kind of record those back and forth. So, here's a topic of this week. We're going to talk about film print emulation. We're going to talk about how we communicate with clients. We're going to talk about how we deal with the workflow of exchanging media across multiple sites. I'm sure we're going to have some episodes about scopes. And we just kind of have a frank, discussion about that. And it's been going really well. I'm really happy with it.